Hey, what is up, everyone? I hope you guys are doing well. Today we got a unique story narrated by my friend Frederick. I hope you guys enjoy it and watch till the end, guys.
In the grim darkness of the far future, there is no waste. Every resource, every scrap of material, every drop of fuel must be squeezed from the galaxy to keep the engines of the Imperium grinding forward. And in this calculus of survival, where quadrillions of human souls live and die under the eye of the God Emperor, even the criminal, the transgressor, the lawbreaker has value, not as a citizen, not as a person, but as raw material to be processed, reformed, and repurposed into something useful for humanity's endless wars. The Imperium of man does not believe in rehabilitation in any sense we might understand it. There are no counselors, no programs of social reintegration, no hope of returning to society as a reformed individual. Justice in the 41st millennium is brutally efficient and horrifyingly practical. When you break the law in the Imperium, you become property, you become ammunition, you become a servitor scrubbing floors in a manufactorum, an arco-flagellant tearing through enemy lines in a narcotic rage, or a member of a penal legion sent to die on some forgotten battlefield where even your death serves the Emperor's purpose. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most disturbing aspects of Warhammer 40,000's setting. We're going to explore exactly how the Imperium takes criminals and transforms them into living weapons, mindless slaves, and expendable soldiers. We're going to walk through the halls of Adeptus Arbite's precinct fortresses, peer into the operating theatres where tech priests perform lobotomies, and stand on the killing fields where penal legions charge into certain death. This is the story of how the Imperium turns its failures into tools, and how in doing so, it reveals the true horror of its existence. The scale of this system is almost incomprehensible. Across 1 million worlds, billions of people break Imperial law every single day. Some commit genuine crimes, acts of violence or theft that would be punished in any society. Others simply fail to meet production quotas, speak words that could be interpreted as heretical, or find themselves in the wrong place when the Adeptus Arbites come looking for someone to blame. All of them feed into the same grinding machine, a system that has been refining itself for 10,000 years to extract maximum utility from human suffering. And the truly terrifying thing is that this system works. It works because the Imperium is so vast, so desperate, so constantly on the edge of annihilation that it cannot afford to simply execute criminals or let them languish in prisons. Every warm body, every functioning brain, every pair of hands must be put to use. The Imperium is drowning in enemies, choking on bureaucracy, and starving for resources. In such circumstances, the idea of wasting a human being becomes intolerable. Better to strip away their humanity, their free will, their very consciousness, and turn them into something productive. This is not a story about redemption, though the Imperium uses that word constantly. This is a story about recycling, about taking broken people and breaking them further, reshaping them into components that can be fitted into the vast machine of imperial civilization. Some of these people truly deserved punishment for genuine crimes. Many did not. But in the end, it doesn't matter. Once you enter this system, your past becomes irrelevant. You are no longer a person with a story. You are raw material awaiting processing. The methods vary depending on the crime, the world, and the needs of the Imperium at any given moment. A criminal on a Forge world might find themselves sentenced to servitude in perpetuis, transformed into a servitor to labor in the very factories where they once worked as a free person. A heretic on a shrine world might be converted into an arco-flagellant, their body and mind twisted into a weapon of the ecclesiarchy. A soldier who fled from battle might join a penal legion, given explosive collars and sent to die earning the Emperor's forgiveness. A prisoner on a hive world might be shipped to a penal colony on some airless rock to mine minerals until exhaustion or accident claims their life. Each path is its own special hell, designed not just to punish, but to extract value from the punishment itself. The Imperium has had 10 millennia to perfect these systems, and it has done so with the same grim efficiency it applies to everything else. Every scream is productive. Every moment of suffering serves a purpose. Every death advances the Imperium's goals, even if only by freeing up a portion of rations for someone else. But before we can understand these fates, we need to understand the system that delivers them. We need to talk about the Adeptus Arbites, the enforcers of imperial law who serve as both judge and executioner. We need to understand the Lex Imperialis, the vast body of law that governs a million worlds. We need to see how crimes are categorized, how sentences are determined, and how the machinery of justice feeds into the machinery of war. Only then can we truly appreciate the horror of what comes next. So settle in and prepare yourself. What follows is not an easy story. It's a glimpse into a future where human life has been reduced to its basest utility, where the line between person and property has been erased entirely, where the only freedom left is the freedom to serve. This is how the Imperium turns criminals into ammunition. This is how it transforms human beings into weapons, tools, and slaves. This is how it maintains order across a million worlds through the simple expedient of making rebellion worse than death. The Adeptus Arbites, enforcers of the Lex Imperialis. Standing between order and chaos in the Imperium are the Adeptus Arbites, the galaxy-spanning law enforcement organization that serves as the ultimate authority on imperial justice. These are not your local police officers, not the enforcers who patrol Hive City streets or investigate murders in the lower levels. The Arbites are something far more terrifying. They are the Emperor's justice made manifest, the iron fist of imperial law. And they have the authority to execute anyone, anywhere, at any time, if they deem it necessary for the greater good of the Imperium. Picture them in your mind, massive figures encased in black carapace armor, carrying combat shotguns and power mauls. Their helmets hide their faces behind reflective visors, transforming them from human beings into faceless icons of authority. They move with the confidence of those who know they are above the law because they are the law. When an arbitrator arrives to investigate a crime, it's not a question of whether someone will be punished. It's only a question of who and how severely. The Adeptus Arbites trace their origins back to the Great Crusade, when the Emperor himself unified Terra and began spreading his vision across the galaxy. As each world was brought into compliance, it became necessary to establish a legal framework that could bind them all together. Local laws could vary wildly from planet to planet, shaped by different cultures, different environments, different histories. But above all these local codes, there needed to be one supreme law that applied universally. This became the Lex Imperialis, the body of imperial law that supersedes all local legislation. The Arbites enforce only the Lex Imperialis. They don't care about local murders unless they threaten imperial stability. They don't investigate thefts unless imperial property is involved. Their jurisdiction covers only the most serious offenses, the crimes that strike at the foundation of imperial power: heresy, sedition, treason, failure to meet production quotas, deviation from approved technological standards, attacks on imperial officials. These are the crimes that bring the Arbites to your door, and when they arrive, hope dies. The organization is structured with ruthless efficiency. At the top sits the Grand Provost Marshal, one of the High Lords of Terra, who represents the Arbites in the highest councils of imperial power. Below the Grand Provost, Marshal are the Marshals of the Court, each overseeing vast precincts that can span entire sectors of space. These precincts are divided between two parallel hierarchies: the judges, who interpret law and pass sentence, and the arbitrators, who enforce those sentences with overwhelming force. On almost every imperial world, you'll find a precinct fortress, a massive fortified structure that serves as courthouse, prison, armory, and barracks all in one. These fortress precedents are deliberately imposing, designed to make clear that the Arbites are not just police, but a military force capable of crushing any resistance. The walls are thick enough to withstand artillery bombardment. The armories contain enough weapons to fight a small war. The detention blocks can hold thousands of prisoners. And the courtrooms, those cold chambers where fates are decided, have seen millions of verdicts delivered over the millennia. When an arbitrator makes an arrest, there is no presumption of innocence. In fact, the very concept would be laughable to them. Imperial law operates on a fundamentally different principle. If you have been arrested, you must have done something to attract attention, and attracting attention is itself suspicious. The Arbites do not make mistakes, because they are the judgment of the Emperor made real. If they have come for you, you are guilty. The only questions are, guilty of what, and what should be done with you? The trial, if one can call it that, is usually swift. The accused is brought before a judge, who reviews whatever evidence has been gathered. This might be surveillance footage, witness testimony, confession extracted under interrogation, or simply the arbitrator's own testimony about what they observed. The accused is allowed to speak, but only to answer specific questions. There are no lawyers, no juries of peers, no appeals process as we would understand it. The judge examines the case through the lens of 10,000 years of precedent, cross-referencing with the vast legal databases stored in the fortress's archives. Then comes the sentence, and this is where the true horror begins, because the Arbites have at their disposal a staggering array of punishments, each calibrated to extract maximum utility from the condemned. Immediate execution for the worst offences, flogging for minor infractions, limb amputation for thieves, exile to a penal world for sedition, conversion to servitor for those who have offended the Adeptus Mechanicus, assignment to a penal legion for military crimes, transformation into an archoflagellant for heresy. The sentence depends on many factors: the nature of the crime, the needs of the Imperium at that moment, the availability of processing facilities, and sometimes pure bureaucratic chance. What makes the Arbites truly terrifying is not their power, but their absolute conviction in their righteousness. They genuinely believe they are serving humanity by enforcing these brutal laws. In their minds, the Imperium teeters perpetually on the edge of extinction, beset by Xenos horrors, chaos, corruption, and internal decay. Only through absolute order can humanity survive. Any deviation from law, any hint of rebellion, any failure to meet expectations threatens the entire species. Therefore, harsh punishment is not cruelty, but necessity. They are not torturers, but saviors, preserving humanity by crushing anything that threatens it. The Arbites are also incorruptible in a way that's almost inhuman. Unlike local enforcers who might accept bribes or show favoritism, arbitrators are conditioned from childhood in the Schola Progenium to value law above all else. They are orphans of imperial servants, raised in institutions that strip away personal identity and replace it with unwavering dedication to duty. By the time they become full arbitrators, they have no family, no home world they feel attachment to, no loyalties except to the law itself. This makes them perfect enforcers, but also contributes to their legendary inflexibility. Stories abound of arbitrators who executed planetary governors for minor violations of imperial law, unconcerned with the political chaos their actions might cause. Of judges who sentenced entire populations to death for collective crimes. Of precinct fortresses besieged by mobs of angry citizens, only for the Arbites to emerge victorious through sheer ruthlessness. They are judge, jury, and executioner, and they carry out all three roles with mechanical efficiency. The Arbites are also equipped to fight wars if necessary. Their precinct fortresses contain armories stocked with combat shotguns, grenade launchers, riot shields, and power mauls. They have access to armored vehicles, including chimeras, rhinos, and even Lehman Russ battle tanks. Their standard carapace armor is of a quality that rivals what many Imperial Guard regiments receive. When a precinct fortress goes into full combat mode, it can function as a completely self-sufficient military base capable of holding out against significant opposition. This military capacity serves a dual purpose. First, it allows the Arbites to suppress major riots, rebellions, and gang uprisings that overwhelm local law enforcement. When an entire hive city section rises in revolt, the Arbites can deploy in battalion strength to crush the uprising with maximum violence. Second, it serves as a deterrent. The presence of a precinct fortress reminds planetary governors and local authorities that Imperial power is always watching, always ready to intervene if they step out of line. But for our purposes, what matters most about the Arbites is their role as the first link in the chain that transforms criminals into Imperial assets. When they make an arrest, they're not just catching lawbreakers, they're identifying raw material for the Imperium's many needs. That murderer might become a servitor. That heretic might become an arco-flagellant. That deserter might join a penal legion. The Arbites feed the system that processes human beings into useful components, and they do so with the same dispassionate efficiency they apply to everything else. The judges who pass sentence rarely see what happens next. Once they deliver their verdict and the condemned is led away from the courtroom, that person ceases to be their concern. They move on to the next case, the next arrest, the next judgment. The system must keep moving. There are always more crimes to judge, more criminals to process, more sentences to deliver. In the 41st millennium, justice never sleeps, because justice is not about fairness or mercy. Justice is about maintaining order, and order must be maintained at any cost. This is the machine that feeds all the horrors we're about to explore. The Arbites identify, arrest, judge, and sentence. What happens after that varies depending on the sentence, but in every case, the result is the same. A human being is transformed into something else, something that serves the Imperium's needs without choice, without will, often without even awareness of what they've become. Categories of Imperial crime and their consequences. Understanding the punishments requires understanding the crimes. The Lex Imperialis is not a simple document. It's a vast, Byzantine body of law that has accumulated over 10,000 years, filled with contradictions, addendums, and precedents that sometimes take centuries to resolve. Judges train for decades just to understand a fraction of it, and even then, they regularly consult with servo skulls carrying portions of the legal archives. At the foundation of Imperial law is a simple principle: the Imperium must survive. Everything else flows from this. Any action that threatens Imperial stability is criminal. Any failure that hinders Imperial goals is punishable. Any deviation from approved norms is suspicious. The law exists not to protect individuals, but to protect the collective machinery of human civilization. You, as an individual, have no rights. You have only duties, and failure to meet those duties is itself a crime. The most serious category of crime is heresy. This encompasses anything that could lead to chaos corruption, from possession of forbidden texts to worship of the dark gods, to simple philosophical speculation about the nature of the emperor. Heresy is treated with extreme prejudice because chaos is an existential threat to humanity. Once corruption takes root, it spreads like cancer, consuming souls and transforming humans into something monstrous. Therefore, even the hint of heresy must be crushed immediately. The punishment for heresy varies. Minor heresies might result in flogging and re-education. Moderate heresies might lead to execution. But in many cases, particularly when dealing with heresies against the imperial creed as interpreted by the ecclesiarchy, the sentence is transformation into an arco-flagellant. The logic is theological. The heretic's soul must be purged of sin through suffering before death, so that they might still join the emperor in the afterlife. By turning them into a living weapon that fights for the Imperium, their sin is burned away through violent service. Treason and sedition form another critical category. This includes everything from plotting against imperial officials to organizing worker strikes to simply expressing opinions that could undermine imperial authority. The Imperium cannot tolerate organized resistance, not because it's morally wrong, but because it's practically dangerous. A Hive City riot can kill millions and halt production for years. A mutiny in an Imperial Guard regiment can lose an entire war. A planetary governor's rebellion can condemn billions to death when the Imperium responds with overwhelming force. Those convicted of sedition or treason face a range of punishments depending on their position and the scale of their crime. A worker who organized a strike might be sent to a penal colony. A soldier who spread defeatist rhetoric might join a penal legion. A noble who plotted rebellion might simply be executed as an example. The key is that the punishment must both remove the individual from society and serve as a deterrent to others who might consider similar actions. Then there are crimes against the Adeptus Mechanicus. These are treated with particular severity because the tech priests are essential to imperial function. They maintain the machines that allow civilization to exist. They operate the forge worlds that produce weapons and equipment. They understand technologies that would be lost without them. To steal from the Mechanicus, to damage their equipment, to interfere with their work, is to threaten the Imperium's technological base. The punishment for crimes against the Mechanicus is almost always conversion to servitor. This serves multiple purposes. First, it provides the Mechanicus with more servitors to maintain their operations. Second, it demonstrates what happens to those who cross the tech priests. Third, it appeals to the Mechanicus's own theology, which holds that even sinners can find redemption through service to the machine god. The criminal's organic body becomes a component in the vast machinery of imperial industry, their consciousness stripped away to prevent further disobedience. Military crimes form yet another category: desertion, cowardice in the face of the enemy, failure to follow orders, losing equipment. These offenses threaten the Imperial Guard's effectiveness and therefore the Imperium's ability to wage war. The punishment is typically assignment to a penal legion, where the offender can prove their courage by dying in situations too dangerous for regular troops. The logic is clear. You failed once, so now you'll be given another chance in circumstances so desperate that redemption requires extraordinary valor or certain death. There are also crimes of incompetence and failure, missing production quotas, losing cargo, causing accidents through negligence. These might seem minor, but in a civilization where every resource is stretched to its limit, incompetence has consequences measured in lives. A factory that fails to meet its quota might leave a regiment without ammunition when they need it most. A ship captain who loses cargo might doom a planet to starvation. Therefore, failure itself is criminal, and those who fail must face consequences. The punishment for incompetence varies wildly. Sometimes it's execution, particularly if the failure caused significant damage. Sometimes it's demotion and additional service. Sometimes it's conversion to servitor, particularly if the failed individual's incompetence stemmed from human weakness that could be resolved by replacing faulty components with reliable machinery. The Imperium has little patience for those who cannot meet expectations, regardless of circumstances. Then there are the ordinary crimes: murder, theft, assault, rape, fraud. These fall under local law unless they involve imperial officials or property. If a hive ganger murders another ganger, local enforcers handle it. If that same ganger murders an imperial official, the Arbites become involved. This dual system means that justice is deeply unequal. The same act might be a local matter or an imperial crime, depending entirely on who was harmed. What's crucial to understand is that imperial law is not concerned with intent, motivation, or circumstances. It doesn't matter if you were forced into heresy at gunpoint. It doesn't matter if you deserted to save wounded comrades. It doesn't matter if you failed your quota because of impossible circumstances. The law judges outcomes, not intentions. If your actions harmed the Imperium, you are guilty. The why is irrelevant. This creates a system where innocence is nearly impossible to prove, and punishment is essentially certain once charges are filed. The judges might show mercy in their sentencing, opting for lighter punishments when circumstances warrant. But that mercy still means something horrific by our standards. A merciful judge might spare you from servitor conversion by only exiling you to a penal world where you'll probably die within months. The categorization of crimes also reflects imperial priorities.
You know, researching this topic has been genuinely unsettling, even by Warhammer standards. I've been covering this universe for a while and I thought I was desensitized to the grimdark. But there's something particularly disturbing about the systematic, industrial nature of how the Imperium processes human beings. It's not random cruelty or chaos corruption, it's organized, efficient dehumanization on a scale that makes real historical atrocities look small by comparison. What really gets me is how normalized that all is within the setting. Citizens walk past servitors every day without a second thought. They accept that this could happen to them or their loved ones if they step out of line. That level of social conditioning is terrifying. And the worst part, the Imperium probably does need these systems to survive. That moral complexity is what makes 40K so compelling and so deeply uncomfortable at the same time. Anyway, let's get back to the story.
Crimes against authority and order are treated more harshly than crimes against individuals. Heresy that threatens spiritual corruption is punished more severely than mass murder. Theft of imperial property might warrant servitor conversion, while theft between citizens might only result in amputation. The law protects the Imperium's interests, not human dignity or individual rights, and hanging over all of this is the sheer arbitrariness of enforcement. The Lex Imperialis is so vast, so complex, so filled with contradictory precedents that judgments can vary wildly between judges, precincts, and worlds. What one judge considers a minor infraction might be a capital crime to another. Two people might commit identical acts and receive completely different sentences based on nothing more than which arbitrator caught them and which judge heard their case. This arbitrariness is not a bug in the system. It's a feature. Unpredictable justice keeps populations off balance, unable to calculate risks or exploit loopholes. If you never know exactly when the law will come for you or what it will do when it does, you're more likely to simply obey in all circumstances. Fear of the unknown is sometimes more effective than fear of known consequences. The end result is a legal system that funnels enormous numbers of people into punishment systems designed to extract value from them. Millions become servitors every year. Thousands become archoflagellants. Entire penal legions are raised, fight, and die, only to be replaced by new ones. Penal colonies on hundreds of worlds house populations larger than most civilizations. The Imperium has industrialized punishment, turning justice into another form of resource extraction. Servitors, the cybernetic slaves. Of all the fates that await those convicted under imperial law, perhaps none is more disturbing than transformation into a servitor. These cybernetic constructs are ubiquitous throughout the Imperium, performing countless tasks that would require artificial intelligence in more advanced societies. But the Imperium fears AI after the rebellion of the Men of Iron during the Dark Age of technology, so instead it uses lobotomized humans implanted with mechanical components, creating organic robots that skirt the line between machine and corpse. Walk through any Imperial facility and you'll see them. In manufactorums, servitors operate assembly lines, their mechanical arms performing precise, repetitive tasks for hours without pause. In Medici facilities, servitor assistants hand instruments to doctors, their blank faces showing no recognition even of patients they've treated before. On starships, servitors man gun batteries and maintain engines in conditions that would kill ordinary humans within minutes. In Adeptus, Mechanicus forge temples, servitors outnumber free humans by ratios of hundreds to 1, forming a vast workforce of semi-organic machinery. They come in countless varieties, each designed for specific tasks. Gun servitors are hulking constructs with heavy weapons mounted on their arms and targeting systems wired directly into their brains. They stand guard at critical facilities, their programming allowing them to identify and eliminate threats without conscious thought. Combat servitors carry close combat weapons and follow Space Marine squads into battle, absorbing enemy fire and attacking with mindless determination. Heavy labor servitors have their limbs replaced with lifting equipment and crane arms, allowing them to move materials too heavy for ordinary humans. Technical servitors are the most common type. They perform maintenance, repair work, and other skilled tasks that would otherwise require trained technicians. Their brains are programmed with specific knowledge, allowing them to perform complex procedures without understanding what they're doing. A technical servitor might be able to repair a plasma reactor, following the programmed steps perfectly. But if you asked it to diagnose a novel problem or adapt to unusual circumstances, it would simply stand there awaiting instructions, its limited consciousness unable to comprehend creativity or problem-solving. Medical servitors assist in hospitals and medici stations, their hands steadier than any humans, their medical knowledge programmed rather than learned. They can perform routine procedures, hand instruments to surgeons, or monitor patients with mechanical precision. Some find them unsettling precisely because they look almost human, while obviously being something less. They move through medici wards like ambulatory corpses, their dead eyes seeing but not recognizing, their programmed responses sounding like speech but lacking any trace of consciousness. There are even specialized servitors for specific roles in the Adeptus Mechanicus. Electro-priest servitors channel electrical energy for religious rituals. Lifter servitors have their entire bodies modified to carry heavy equipment. Scribe servitors sit in archival chambers, their fingers modified to write at inhuman speeds, transcribing documents for centuries until their biological components finally fail. But what makes servitors truly horrifying is not their appearance or their tasks, but what they were. Each servitor, unless vat-grown from cloned tissue, was once a person. They had names, memories, hopes, fears. They might have been criminals, yes, but criminals who could still think, feel, and experience life. Then they were processed, transformed from human beings into biological components of the Imperium's vast machinery. The question of consciousness haunts every discussion of servitors. Are they aware? Do they experience their existence as suffering? The official position of both the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Imperium is that servitors are essentially dead, their higher brain functions destroyed during conversion, leaving only enough neural activity to control motor functions and process basic commands. They are, in this interpretation, no more aware than a gun or a vehicle, simply more organic in their construction. But the evidence suggests otherwise. In multiple documented cases, servitors have experienced what the Mechanicus calls mind lock, a malfunction where fragments of their previous personality resurface. During mind lock, servitors have been observed crying, begging for help, speaking their original names, trying to communicate with people they once knew. Some simply repeat phrases over and over. Help me. Please. Make it stop. Who am I? These episodes are considered technical failures, and the affected servitor is typically mind-wiped again, or destroyed if the problem persists. Even more disturbing are accounts from psychers who claim they can sense the anguish of servitors' trapped souls. According to these individuals, though servitors lack the consciousness to articulate their suffering, their souls remain partially present, caught in a nightmare of endless servitude without understanding or escape. The Mechanicus dismisses such claims as superstition, but the consistency of these reports across different psychers on different worlds suggests there might be truth to them. The variety of servitors reflects the vast range of tasks the Imperium needs performed. On Forge worlds, servitors outnumber free humans by tremendous ratios, forming the bulk of the industrial workforce. On hive worlds, servitors maintain infrastructure, clear waste, and perform the countless mundane tasks that keep billions of people alive. On naval vessels, servitors operate in sections too dangerous for regular crew, exposed to radiation, toxic fumes, and vacuum conditions that would kill ordinary humans. Some servitors are created from scratch using vat-grown bodies that never possessed consciousness. These clone bodies are grown to specific specifications, then implanted with the cybernetics and programming needed for their designated role. These servitors never experience the horror of losing their humanity because they never possessed it. They are, from the moment of their creation, tools rather than people. But many servitors, perhaps most, are created from criminals, failed workers, or others deemed surplus to imperial needs. These individuals experienced life as free humans before their transformation. They had childhoods, relationships, ambitions. Then they were condemned, processed, and transformed into something that barely resembles what they were. Whether they retain any awareness of this transformation is a question that keeps some imperial citizens awake at night, though most have long since stopped thinking about it. Servitors are simply part of the environment, like walls or doors, too common to inspire reflection. The acceptance of servitors reveals something profound about the Imperium's values. In a society that claims to worship the God Emperor and value human souls, the routine conversion of humans into servitors suggests that some humans are considered more valuable than others. There's a hierarchy of humanity in imperial thought. At the top are the Adeptus Astartes, post-human warriors worth more than entire regiments of ordinary soldiers. Below them come various ranks of imperial servants, each valued according to their utility. At the bottom are criminals, mutants, and failures, people whose value is negative until they're processed into something useful. Servitors exist at the border between person and property. They're organic, containing human DNA and biological systems, but they're also owned, bought, sold, and treated as equipment. The Mechanicus manufactures them. Nobles commission custom servitors for specific tasks. Military organizations receive servitors as standard equipment. No one considers their welfare or comfort because they're not considered sapient beings, regardless of what they might have been before conversion. The sheer number of servitors in the Imperium is staggering. On a single Forge world, there might be billions. Across the Imperium, the total must number in the trillions. They form a hidden workforce, present everywhere but rarely acknowledged, performing the tasks that keep imperial civilization functioning. Without servitors, the Imperium would collapse. There simply aren't enough free humans to perform all necessary tasks, especially the most dangerous and degrading ones. Servitors fill this gap, working tirelessly until their biological components fail and they're replaced. This creates a constant demand for more servitors. Existing ones wear out, malfunction, or are destroyed in accidents. New facilities need new servitors. Military campaigns require combat servitors. Forge worlds always need more labor. This demand is one reason why the conversion to servitor is such a common punishment. It serves multiple purposes: removing criminals from society, deterring others from crime, and meeting the endless need for more biological machinery. The servitor creation process, surgery, and suffering. The transformation from human to servitor is not instantaneous. It's a multi-stage process that typically takes days or even weeks, depending on the complexity of the final servitor and the facilities available. What happens during this process varies between Forge worlds and tech priest conclaves, but the fundamental steps remain consistent: assessment, lobotomy, implantation, programming, and testing. The first stage is assessment. When a criminal is sentenced to servitude in perpetuis, they're transferred from arbites custody to adeptus mechanicus facilities. Tech priests examine them to determine what kind of servitor they should become. This depends on physical characteristics, existing skills, and current needs. A strong, healthy individual might become a heavy labor servitor. Someone with fine motor skills might become a technical servitor. A weak or damaged person might have most of their body replaced with machinery, becoming more machine than flesh. During assessment, the condemned is typically still fully conscious and aware. They know what's coming. They've seen servitors. They understand, at least intellectually, what they're about to become. Some beg, some resist, some accept their fate with resignation. The tech priests barely notice these reactions. To them, the condemned is already more an object than a person, raw biological material awaiting processing. Then comes the lobotomy. This is the critical step that transforms a thinking human into a programmable machine. The procedure varies in extent depending on the servitor type. For simple monotask servitors, the lobotomy is extensive, destroying most higher brain functions and leaving only the brainstem and motor control centers. For more complex servitors that need to perform varied tasks, the lobotomy is more selective, destroying areas associated with consciousness, volition, and emotion, while preserving regions that handle complex motor control and procedural memory. The exact method of lobotomy also varies. Some forge worlds use chemical treatments, injecting compounds that systematically destroy specific brain structures. Others use surgical intervention, physically cutting into the brain to sever connections and remove tissue. Still others employ a combination of both approaches, using chemicals to soften tissue before making precise cuts. In many cases, no anesthetic is used during the procedure. The mechanicus considers this unnecessary, since the subject will soon lose the capacity to remember pain anyway. What happens during these procedures is almost too horrible to describe in detail. Imagine being strapped to an operating table, fully conscious, while tech priests methodically destroy your ability to think. You feel the cuts, the injections, the manipulation of your brain tissue. You know what's happening to you. You can feel your thoughts becoming confused, your memories fragmenting, your sense of self dissolving, and you can't stop it, can't fight it, can't even scream effectively, as the parts of your brain that process language are systematically shut down. The tech priests performing these operations are not sadists. They're simply practical. Consciousness is a function of specific brain structures, and those structures must be eliminated or severely damaged to create a compliant servitor. If the subject suffers during this process, that suffering is regrettable but irrelevant. The goal is to produce a functional servitor, not to minimize discomfort. Some tech priests view the process through a religious lens, seeing it as a form of redemption where the sinful flesh is purged to create something pure and mechanical. After lobotomy comes implantation. This is where the cybernetics are installed. The extent of implantation varies enormously. A simple technical servitor might only receive a few implants, a data jack in the skull to receive instructions, tool mounts replacing hands, perhaps reinforced bones to allow heavy lifting. A complex combat servitor might have most of their body replaced, pneumatic limbs, weapon mounts, armor plating, enhanced sensory systems, internal power supplies. The implantation process is extensive surgery, often taking many hours or even days for complex servitors. Limbs are amputated and replaced with mechanical equivalents. Organs are removed and replaced with cybernetic systems. The ribcage might be opened to install power supplies or weapon systems. The skull is frequently modified to accommodate data jacks, sensory implants, or direct connections to the remaining brain tissue. Throughout this process, the partially lobotomized subject remains alive, their remaining consciousness unable to process what's happening to them. Once the implants are installed, the programming begins. This is where the servitor's behavior is determined. Using direct connections to the brain, Tech priests upload instruction sets that define how the servitor will respond to commands. For simple servitors, this might just be a few basic routines. For complex servitors, it might be vast databases of procedural knowledge, allowing them to perform skilled tasks without conscious understanding. The programming phase reveals the essential nature of servitors. They're biological computers, their brains serving as organic processors that execute pre-programmed routines. They can't learn, adapt, or improvise. They can only follow instructions, either those uploaded during programming or those given by their operators. This makes them reliable but inflexible, perfect for repetitive tasks but useless for anything requiring genuine thought. Testing follows programming. The newly created servitor is run through exercises to verify that it functions correctly. Can it follow basic commands? Can it perform its designated tasks? Are the implants properly integrated? Does it show any signs of awareness or resistance? If problems are detected, the servitor goes back for adjustment, either through additional programming, further lobotomy, or mechanical repairs. Some servitors fail testing completely. The lobotomy might have been too extensive, leaving insufficient brain function to control the body. The implants might reject, causing infection or system failure. The programming might not take properly, leaving the servitor unable to process commands. Failed servitors are typically recycled, their cybernetics salvaged, and their organic components disposed of. Sometimes the components are used to create other servitors in a grim form of biological recycling. For those servitors that pass testing, their transformation is complete. They're assigned to their designated roles and begin their service. From this point forward, they are considered equipment rather than people. They have no rights, no legal status, no identity beyond their serial number and designation. They work until they break down, at which point they're either repaired or scrapped, depending on the cost-benefit analysis. The servitor creation process is industrialized on many Forge worlds. Assembly line facilities process hundreds or even thousands of individuals per day, transforming them into servitors with mechanical efficiency. Tech priests have refined the process over millennia, optimizing each step to maximize throughput while minimizing cost. Special processing facilities exist solely for this purpose. Massive complexes where criminals enter as people and exit as products. What makes this process particularly disturbing is how normalized it's become. Across the Imperium, millions of people undergo this transformation every year. It's so common that most Imperial citizens rarely think about it. Servitors are just part of the infrastructure, like sewage systems or power cables. No one mourns for them. No one questions whether this is right or necessary. It's simply how things are, have always been, and always will be. The tech priests who perform these operations are not monsters. Most genuinely believe they're serving the Omnissiah and the Imperium by efficiently processing raw materials into useful products. They see the human form as inherently flawed, prone to weakness, emotion, and error. By stripping away consciousness and replacing flesh with blessed machinery, they're creating something better, more pure, more reliable. In their theology, servitors are closer to the machine god than free humans, because they've shed the weakness of sapience. For the condemned, there's usually no possibility of escape once the process begins. The facilities where servitors are created are heavily secured, guarded by combat servitors, and monitored by tech priests. Even if someone managed to escape mid-transformation, they would likely be so damaged that death would follow quickly. The Imperium doesn't believe in half measures. Once the sentence is passed, it will be carried out, regardless of pleas, bribes, or resistance. Archoflagellants, living weapons of redemption. Where servitors are tools, archoflagellants are weapons. These horrifying cyborg berserkers represent the ecclesiarchy's answer to the question, how do we punish heresy while still extracting military value from the heretic? The result is a fate that might be even worse than servitor conversion, because archoflagellants retain just enough consciousness to suffer while being unable to control their actions. The name archoflagellant comes from ancient Terran tradition, referring to religious practices of self-flagellation and penance. But in the 41st millennium, the concept has been taken to grotesque extremes. An archoflagellant is created from someone convicted of heresy or crimes against the imperial creed. Rather than simply executing them, the ecclesiarchy hands them over to the Adeptus Mechanicus for transformation into living weapons that will atone for their sins through violence. Picture them in your mind. Hunched figures, their bodies heavily modified with cybernetics. Both arms have been amputated and replaced with weapons. Heavy industrial shears, electro-flails, power blades, or pneumatics. These weapons are not held, but are permanent parts of their bodies, grafted directly onto the stumps of their shoulders. A battery of chemical injectors runs along their spine, ready to pump combat drugs and pain suppressants directly into their bloodstream. Their faces are hidden behind sealed pacifier helms, closed containers that control their consciousness through a combination of neural implants and chemical alteration. Unlike servitors, archoflagellants are not lobotomized in the same way. Their consciousness remains, trapped inside their transformed bodies. But they have no control. The pacifier helm keeps them in a state of docility, their minds filled with endless loops of hymns, prayers, and sacred imagery. They experience a kind of enforced religious ecstasy, unable to think clearly or act independently. They simply exist in this state, standing motionless, swaying slightly as the religious programming plays endlessly in their minds. Then comes the trigger word. Each archoflagellant is programmed to respond to a specific phrase, usually something in High Gothic relating to judgment or righteousness. When a priest or inquisitor speaks this word, the pacifier helm deactivates. The religious imagery is replaced with visions of horror, suffering, and chaos. The pain suppressants are shut off and replaced with combat stimulants, adrenaline analogues, and berserker rage-inducing chemicals. The archoflagellant's consciousness is flooded with programmed hatred and the overwhelming compulsion to destroy everything nearby that isn't marked as friendly. What follows is carnage. The archoflagellant charges forward, their weapon arms flailing wildly, cutting through anything in their path. They feel no pain from wounds they receive. They know no fear or hesitation. They attack with absolute abandon, their heavily muscled bodies enhanced by the combat drugs flooding their system. They're incredibly dangerous in close combat, able to shred through enemy formations with terrifying speed. But here's the truly horrific part. They're aware during this rampage. Unlike servitors, archoflagellants retain consciousness even during combat. They experience their own berserker fury from inside, unable to control their actions, but aware of everything they're doing. Imagine being trapped in your own body, watching yourself commit acts of horrific violence, feeling the impact of your weapons hitting flesh, hearing the screams of your victims, and being completely powerless to stop yourself. The chemical cocktail pumping through their veins makes them feel rage and bloodlust. But beneath that chemically induced emotion, the core of who they were still exists. They might not want to kill. They might be horrified by what they're being forced to do. But the programming and drugs override their will completely. They have become weapons that happen to still contain a human consciousness, forced to witness their own actions without any ability to refuse. After battle, assuming they survive, another trigger word deactivates them. The combat drugs are flushed from their system. The pacifier helm reasserts control. The visions of horror fade, replaced once again by the endless loop of prayers and hymns. The archoflagellant returns to docility, standing motionless until needed again. If they remember their rampage, there's nothing they can do about it. They can't speak, can't communicate, can't even control their own bodies enough to end their existence. The sentence of archoflagellation is considered a form of redemption in ecclesiarchy theology. The reasoning goes like this. The heretic has sinned against the God Emperor, staining their soul with blasphemy or doubt. Simple execution would send them to damnation. But by transforming them into an archoflagellant, their soul is given the opportunity to be cleansed through suffering and service. Each enemy they kill in the Emperor's name burns away a portion of their sin. When they finally die in battle, having served faithfully despite their transformation, they might be redeemed enough to join the Emperor in the afterlife. Whether anyone truly believes this theology is unclear. It's possible that everyone involved understands it's just justification for creating useful weapons from condemned criminals. But the rhetoric serves an important purpose. It makes the punishment acceptable within imperial society. Citizens can witness archoflagellants being deployed and tell themselves that justice is being served, that even heretics can find redemption, that the Emperor's mercy extends even to the fallen. The creation of an archoflagellant is almost as extensive as servitor conversion. After sentencing, the condemned is transferred to Mechanicus facilities. Their arms are amputated and replaced with weapon mounts. The pacifier helm is installed, requiring extensive surgery to connect the neural interfaces directly to the brain. The chemical delivery system is grafted onto their spine, with tubes running into the bloodstream. Often their torso is reinforced with subdermal armor, and their muscles are enhanced with chemical treatments or mechanical augmentation. Throughout this process, the condemned remains conscious much longer than a servitor would. The lobotomy for an archoflagellant is minimal, just enough to install the control systems, but not enough to eliminate awareness. Some accounts suggest that the final stage of the surgery, when the prefrontal cortex is damaged just enough to allow programming, but not enough to eliminate consciousness, is deliberately done without anesthetic. The reasoning, if you can call it that, is that the condemned should experience the pain of their transformation as the first stage of their penance. Once created, archoflagellants are stored in stasis or kept in holding cells until needed. The ecclesiarchy maintains stocks of them at major cathedrals and shrines. Inquisitors of the Ordo Hereticus often have several in their retinues, finding them useful for situations where subtle investigation gives way to violent confrontation. The Adepta Sororitas sometimes deploy them in battle, particularly the Order of the Valorous Heart, which has a theological tradition that values redemptive suffering. In combat, archoflagellants are deployed in small groups or packs. They're pointed at the enemy and activated. Then they're essentially unleashed, charging forward in a frenzy of violence. They're particularly effective against lightly armored infantry, where their whirling weapon arms can cut through dozens of enemies in seconds. They're also terrifying psychological weapons, their inhuman appearance and berserk behavior breaking enemy morale. The lifespan of an archoflagellant is typically short. They're designed to be expendable, thrown into the most dangerous situations without regard for their survival. Most die in their first or second deployment. The combat drugs strain their hearts and organs, often causing organ failure even if they survive battle. The wounds they sustain, though ignored during combat, often prove fatal afterward. And if they do survive multiple battles, they're eventually worn out by the cumulative damage, their bodies breaking down from repeated trauma and chemical abuse. Unlike servitors, archoflagellants sometimes malfunction in ways that reveal their trapped consciousness. There are recorded cases of archoflagellants breaking free of their programming mid-combat, turning on their handlers, or simply collapsing and refusing to fight. More disturbing are reports of deactivated archoflagellants managing to communicate, using crude signs or damaged vocalizations to beg for death. These malfunctions are rare, but they happen often enough that the Mechanicus has entire procedures for dealing with them, usually involving immediate termination and recycling. The existence of archoflagellants reveals something about imperial theology that makes even some faithful citizens uncomfortable. If the ecclesiarchy truly believes in redemption through suffering, what does that say about their concept of mercy? If forcing someone to commit violence against their will while trapped in a mutilated body is considered compassionate, what does that imply about their values? These questions are rarely asked aloud, but they linger in the minds of those who've seen arco-flagellants up close. For the condemned, there's typically no warning before the sentence. The trial concludes, the judge pronounces arco-flagellation, and armed guards immediately seize the prisoner. Within hours, they're on a transport to a mechanicus facility. Within days, their transformation is complete. The person who entered that facility no longer exists. In their place is a weapon in human shape, conscious enough to suffer but powerless to resist, serving the Imperium through a form of slavery so absolute that it extends even to control of their own thoughts and actions. Penal legions, fighting for forgiveness. Not all criminals are transformed into servitors or arco-flagellants. Some are given what the Imperium calls a last chance, service in a penal legion. This might sound more merciful than the alternatives, and in some ways it is. Penal legionnaires at least retain their humanity, their consciousness, their ability to think and act independently. But the reality of service in a penal legion is its own special kind of hell. A slow death march dressed up as an opportunity for redemption. Penal legions are military units composed entirely of convicted criminals, deserters, cowards, and others who have earned death sentences but might still be useful. They're part of the Astra Militarum, the vast Imperial Guard, but they're kept segregated from regular regiments and assigned to the most dangerous missions imaginable. The logic is simple. These people are already condemned to die, so their deaths should serve the Emperor's purposes. Better they die attacking an enemy position than simply be executed. The composition of a penal legion varies. Some are drawn from military crimes, soldiers who deserted, officers who failed their duties, guardsmen who broke discipline. Others come from civilian prisons, convicted of crimes serious enough to warrant death, but offered this alternative. Some penal worlds exist solely to house criminals who are periodically tithed to form new penal legions. And in desperate times, planetary governors have been known to empty their prisons into penal legions to meet Imperial Guard recruitment quotas. When you join a penal legion, the first thing that happens is you get marked. Your head is shaved and tattooed with unit insignia. You're given a serial number that replaces your name in all official records. And most importantly, you're fitted with an explosive collar. These collars are one of the defining features of penal legions, a constant reminder of your status. The collars contain small explosive charges, enough to decapitate the wearer, but not powerful enough to harm anyone nearby. The collars serve multiple purposes. First, they prevent desertion. Try to run, and the collar can be detonated remotely. Second, they maintain discipline. Refuse orders, and your handler might trigger the collar as an example to others. Third, they're psychological weapons. Every penal legionnaire knows they're wearing their death around their neck, controlled by someone who views them as less than human. This creates a constant state of fear and helplessness that makes rebellion less likely. But collars aren't the only control mechanism. Penal legions are heavily supervised by arbitrators and commissars. These enforcers move through the ranks, watching for any sign of defiance or hesitation. They have absolute authority to execute any legionnaire at any time for any reason, and they use this authority freely. A penal legion might lose 10% of its strength to summary executions before it even reaches the battlefield, as commanders weed out anyone they consider insufficiently committed. Some penal legions also use chemical control. Combat drugs, stimulants, or even Frenzen, a drug that induces berserker rage, are administered before battle. These substances make the legionnaires more aggressive, less fearful, and more willing to charge into certain death. The drugs also cloud judgment, making it harder to realize just how suicidal the orders they're being given really are. The equipment issued to penal legions varies, but is generally inferior to what regular Imperial Guard regiments receive. Old laser guns, worn combat armor, basic kit. The Imperium doesn't waste good equipment on people expected to die quickly. Some penal legions are issued even less, essentially being sent into battle with whatever scraps could be found. The message is clear. You're expendable, and the Imperium isn't going to invest resources in keeping you alive. The missions assigned to penal legions are almost always the most dangerous ones imaginable. Frontal assaults on fortified positions, advancing through minefields to trigger the explosives so regular troops can follow safely, holding rearguard positions to the last man while valuable regiments retreat, testing enemy defenses by attacking and observing where fire comes from before the attack is called off. These aren't missions designed to win battles, they're missions designed to gather information or soften enemy positions at the cost of as many legionnaire lives as necessary. Consider a typical penal legion assault. The enemy holds a fortified bunker complex with heavy weapons. A regular Imperial Guard regiment could take it, but casualties would be high. So instead, the penal legion is sent forward. They advance in waves, poorly equipped and lightly armored. The enemy guns them down by the hundreds. But in doing so, the enemy reveals their firing positions, expends ammunition, and perhaps grows complacent. Then the regular guard arrives, having learned from observing the penal legion's slaughter exactly where the defenses are strongest and how to overcome them. The casualty rates are staggering. A penal legion might lose 90% of its strength in a single engagement. Those who survive face another mission just as deadly, and another, and another. The attrition is so severe that penal legions are constantly being reinforced with fresh criminals, maintaining their numbers through continuous infusion of new condemned prisoners. Yet remarkably, some penal legionnaires do survive. Not many, but some. They might possess unusual skill, extraordinary luck, or simply the kind of practical cunning that allows them to survive where others die. These veterans become hardened killers, far more dangerous than typical Imperial Guard soldiers, because they've learned to survive in situations where survival should be impossible. The most famous example is the 13th Penal Legion, also known as the Last Chances. This unit is handpicked by the mysterious Colonel Schaefer, who selects criminals with specific talents useful for special operations. Unlike typical penal legions that are used as cannon fodder, the Last Chances are sent on precision missions, assassinations, sabotage, infiltration. Their casualty rates are still horrific, but those who survive multiple missions might eventually earn a full pardon. This possibility of redemption is dangled before all penal legionnaires like a carrot before a mule. Theoretically, service in a penal legion is not a death sentence, but an opportunity. Fight bravely enough, survive long enough, perform some act of extraordinary valor, and you might be pardoned. Your explosive collar might be removed. You might be transferred to a regular guard regiment, or even granted full citizenship again. This hope keeps some fighting when logic would dictate surrender or suicide, but in practice, pardons are vanishingly rare. Most penal legionnaires die in their first battle. Of those who survive, most die in their second or third. Those who survive longer often die from accumulated injuries, disease, or exhaustion. The handful who actually live long enough to potentially earn redemption face a system designed to ensure they never quite do enough. The bar for pardon is set deliberately high, requiring acts of heroism so extreme that attempting them is itself suicidal. Some imperial officials justify this system by claiming it's more humane than the alternatives. Instead of executing criminals or converting them to servitors, the penal legion system at least gives them a chance to prove themselves. They die as humans rather than as mindless tools, and their deaths serve a purpose, contributing to imperial victories that might not have been possible otherwise. In this view, penal legions are a practical compromise between justice and military necessity, but others see it as institutionalized cruelty, a system that prolongs death rather than preventing it. The condemned are given just enough hope to keep them fighting, while being placed in situations where survival is almost impossible. They're used as human shields, mine detectors, and expendable assault troops. Their suffering is drawn out over weeks or months, rather than ended quickly. And through it all, They're forced to maintain the fiction that they're soldiers serving the emperor rather than condemned prisoners being slowly executed. The penal legions also serve as a deterrent. Every Imperial guardsman knows what happens to deserters and cowards. They've seen penal legions sent on suicide missions. They understand that failure in the regular guard might result in transfer to a penal legion, where death becomes even more certain. This knowledge helps maintain discipline in regular regiments, making soldiers more willing to face danger rather than risk the alternative. Some penal legions develop their own cultures and hierarchies despite their supposed status as the lowest of the low. Leadership emerges among the condemned, usually based on survival skills and the ability to keep others alive just long enough to complete missions. These informal leaders might not have official rank, but they command respect from fellow legionnaires who recognize that following their lead increases survival odds from impossible to merely highly unlikely. The arbitrators and commissars who supervise penal legions are generally not sympathetic figures. Most view their charges as already dead criminals who simply haven't stopped moving yet. Some are actively cruel, enjoying the power they hold over the condemned. Others are simply indifferent, treating legionnaires as equipment to be expended rather than people to be led. Rare indeed is the supervisor who shows any genuine concern for penal legionnaire welfare. When a penal legion is finally destroyed, which is inevitable given how they're employed, what happens to any survivors varies. Sometimes they're transferred to another penal legion to fill out its ranks. Sometimes they're transferred to regular regiments if they've proven themselves sufficiently. Sometimes they're simply executed if their original crime was serious enough that survival itself is considered suspicious. There's no consistent policy, just the arbitrary decisions of whoever happens to be in command. The existence of penal legions reveals uncomfortable truths about Imperial military doctrine. The Imperium has so many people that it can afford to waste them. Human life, particularly criminal human life, has less value than the information gained by sending that life into a meat grinder. The same resources that might train soldiers to be more effective are instead spent on systems of control and punishment because controlling the condemned is considered more important than maximizing their effectiveness. Penal worlds and mining colonies. Slow death in the dark. For those criminals whose offenses don't warrant immediate transformation into weapons or tools, there's another fate: exile to a penal world. These are entire planets designated as prisons, places where the condemned are sent to live out their remaining years in harsh labor, brutal conditions, and minimal oversight. If servitor conversion is a quick death and archoflagellation is an agonizing one, exile to a penal world is death by attrition, a slow grinding away of life in service to the Imperium's insatiable hunger for resources. Penal worlds come in several varieties, each its own unique hell. Some are mining colonies, where prisoners extract valuable minerals from harsh environments. Others are labor camps, where convicts work on massive infrastructure projects or in agricultural operations. Still others are simply dumping grounds, worlds where the Imperium sends criminals to die with minimal resources and maximal suffering. Mining penal worlds are perhaps the most common type. The Imperium's war machine requires staggering quantities of raw materials: ore for steel, rare minerals for advanced technology, radioactive elements for reactors and weapons. Many valuable deposits exist on worlds too hostile for normal colonization. The solution? Turn them into penal colonies. Send criminals to mine under conditions that would be intolerable for free workers. Extract everything valuable, and don't worry too much about how many prisoners die in the process. Consider Sorith, an icy mining world in the Calixis sector. The mean surface temperature is negative 210 degrees Celsius. There's no atmosphere. The planet is covered in frozen gas deposits that have commercial value but require extreme conditions to extract. The penal colony there houses 20,000 convicts who work in sealed mining facilities, venturing out onto the surface in protective gear to harvest frozen gases. Accidents are common. Equipment failures are routine. Life expectancy is measured in months. Or consider a world like Savla, a penal mining colony infamous for its toxic atmosphere and dangerous conditions. The planet is rich in valuable chemicals and minerals, but everything about the environment is hostile to human life. The air is poisonous. The temperatures swing wildly between freezing and scorching. Dangerous fauna make any surface excursion risky. Yet thousands of prisoners labor there, mining resources for the Imperium while slowly succumbing to environmental hazards, industrial accidents, and simple exhaustion. The living conditions on penal worlds are deliberately harsh. The Imperium sees no reason to waste resources making prisoners comfortable. Food is minimal, usually NutriPaste or algae slurry that provides just enough calories to keep workers functional. Housing is crowded dormitories, or even just sleeping areas in the mines themselves. Medical care is almost non-existent. Injured workers who can't continue laboring are often just left to die. The work itself is backbreaking, dangerous, and endless. Control on penal worlds varies, but is always oppressive. Some are run directly by the Adeptus Arbites, with precinct fortresses overseeing vast populations of prisoners. Others are administered by planetary governors who use penal labor as a resource. Many have minimal oversight, relying on the hostile environment itself to prevent escape. After all, where would you run to on an airless rock or a planet covered in toxic desert? The populations of penal worlds are surprisingly diverse. Some prisoners are there for genuine crimes, murder, treason, sedition. Others committed what would be minor offenses on other worlds, but were serious infractions in their specific context. Failed workers who couldn't meet production quotas, soldiers who showed cowardice, bureaucrats who made costly mistakes, people who simply attracted the wrong kind of attention at the wrong time. All of them end up together, creating strange societies where hardened criminals mix with unlucky civilians. These prison societies develop their own hierarchies and rules. Gangs form, controlling access to better food, safer work assignments, or contraband. Violence is common as prisoners compete for resources and status. The strong prey on the weak in ways that would be criminal anywhere else, but are simply accepted as inevitable on penal worlds. The authorities rarely intervene unless violence threatens productivity. What prisoners do to each other is their own business. Some penal worlds have existed for centuries or even millennia. The original prisoners are long dead, but their descendants remain. In theory, children born on penal worlds are free, but in practice, they have nowhere else to go. They grow up knowing only the harsh life of the prison colony, and many eventually join the workforce themselves, either voluntarily or because the authorities decide they're old enough to contribute. Thus, penal worlds develop permanent populations of people who've never committed crimes, but are trapped nonetheless. The work itself varies by world, but is always dangerous and exhausting. On mining worlds, prisoners descend into deep tunnels, extracting ore by hand or with basic equipment. Cave-ins are common. Gas leaks kill without warning. Equipment failures leave workers trapped underground. On agricultural penal worlds, prisoners work massive hydroponic facilities or algae farms, their health slowly destroyed by exposure to chemicals and biological agents. On industrial worlds, they labor in manufactorums too dangerous for servitors, exposed to radiation, toxic compounds, and heavy machinery. The mortality rate on penal worlds is staggering. On the harshest colonies, half the prison population might die within the first year. New arrivals struggle to adapt to the hostile conditions, the brutal work, and the violent prison society. Those who survive the first year have somewhat better odds, but still face constant danger. Very few prisoners live long enough to see their sentences completed, assuming they even had defined sentences rather than indefinite exile. Yet paradoxically, some penal worlds become recruitment grounds for the Imperial Guard. When penal legions need reinforcements, recruiters visit these colonies and offer prisoners a choice. Continue mining until you die, or join a penal legion and at least die fighting. Many accept, seeing even the suicidal missions of a penal legion as preferable to slow death in the mines. These recruitments drain penal worlds of their strongest and most capable workers. But the Imperium doesn't care. There are always more criminals to replace them. Escape from a penal world is theoretically possible, but practically almost impossible. The worlds are chosen specifically for their isolation and hostile environments. Even if a prisoner somehow overcame the guards and reached a transport, where would they go? Their faces are in Imperial databases. They're legally dead in many cases, their property confiscated, and their identities expunged. And the punishment for escaped penal colonists, if recaptured, is typically immediate execution or conversion to servitor. Still, some try. Desperate prisoners steal ships, kill guards, or brave hostile environments in attempts to reach freedom. Most die in the attempt. A very few succeed in escaping the immediate world, only to discover they're still trapped in the broader Imperium where they're wanted criminals. Some join pirate crews or smuggler operations. Others find refuge in the underbelly of hive cities. But they live the rest of their lives knowing that if they're ever identified, their fate will be worse than what they escaped. The economic logic of penal worlds is coldly efficient. The Imperium gets valuable resources extracted at minimal cost. The labor force is essentially free, costing only whatever's needed to keep workers barely alive and productive. No wages are paid. No benefits are provided. When workers die, more criminals are shipped in to replace them. From a purely utilitarian perspective, it's an excellent system for resource extraction. But the human cost is incalculable. Millions of people live and die on these worlds, their lives reduced to nothing but labor. Some genuinely deserve punishment for serious crimes. Many others are there due to circumstances beyond their control, political persecution, bureaucratic error, or simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. All of them share the same fate, working until they can't, then dying forgotten in some tunnel or dormitory, their bodies recycled or simply left where they fall. Penal worlds also serve as dumping grounds for populations the Imperium considers problematic but not immediately dangerous. Political dissidents, religious minorities, mutants with visible but non-threatening mutations. Entire populations of rebellious worlds have been relocated to penal colonies as punishment. These mass exiles create unique situations where thousands or millions of people who aren't criminals in any conventional sense labor alongside genuine murderers and traitors. The guards and administrators who run penal worlds are often little better than their charges. Corruption is endemic. Guards sell contraband, take bribes to provide better assignments, or simply abuse their power for entertainment. Administrators embezzle resources meant for prisoners. Some penal worlds are basically personal fiefdoms for corrupt governors who use prison labor to enrich themselves while reporting satisfactory production to imperial authorities. Cherubim and other specialized constructs. Among the various fates awaiting criminals in the Imperium, one of the most disturbing is transformation into a cherub. These floating, angelic constructs are common sights in imperial facilities, particularly those associated with the ecclesiarchy and the adeptus mechanicus. They appear to be innocent, childlike beings with wings, often carrying scrolls, relics, or other items. But their true nature is far darker than their appearance suggests. Cherubim are technically a specialized type of servitor. Like other servitors, they combine organic and mechanical components, controlled by a limited biological cortex and programmed for specific tasks. But unlike standard servitors, cherubim are designed to resemble human children, complete with cherubic faces and what appear to be feathered wings. These wings are purely aesthetic, non-functional decoration. The actual flight capability comes from anti-gravitic generators installed in the construct's body. The creation of cherubim is more complex and expensive than standard servitor production. Each is essentially custom-made, grown in vats from biological material, and then extensively modified with cybernetics. The process requires creating a viable skeletal structure, circulatory system, and nervous system, all scaled down to child size. The result is a construct that looks disturbingly human, while being fundamentally artificial. Most cherubim are created from vat-grown tissue that never possessed consciousness. These clone bodies are engineered specifically for this purpose, designed to grow to childlike proportions before being integrated with their cybernetic components. The biological material is patterned from various animal DNA, sometimes simian, sometimes avian, sometimes other creatures, combined in ways that create a human-like appearance without using actual human genetics. But there are darker rumors about cherubim creation. Some accounts speak of cherubim created from actual human infants, either stillborn children or babies who died in early infancy. These stories describe noble families commissioning cherubim from their dead children, preserving something of their child's form, while repurposing the remains into useful constructs. Other accounts mention cherubim, created from the children of criminals or unwanted births from hive world populations. The Mechanicus officially denies these practices. According to official doctrine, all cherubim are vat-grown from non-sapient biological material, never from actual children. The appearance of humanity is deliberate design, meant to invoke feelings of purity and innocence, but the constructs themselves never possessed human consciousness. Whether this is entirely true or merely the official position to avoid ethical complications is unclear. What is certain is that cherubim exist in enormous numbers throughout the Imperium, and something must provide the biological material for their construction. Unlike standard servitors, cherubim are designed for tasks requiring delicacy and a semblance of intelligence. They carry sacred texts and relics during religious ceremonies. They assist with detailed maintenance tasks, their small hands able to reach into tight spaces. Some serve as familiars for inquisitors with psychic abilities, amplifying their master's powers. Others function as messengers, carrying items or simple information between individuals in Imperial facilities. The behavioral programming of cherubim is more sophisticated than standard servitors. They're capable of a wider range of responses and can adapt to novel situations within limits. Some can speak, though their voices are typically high-pitched and somewhat unsettling. They can show crude emotional responses, programmed reactions that mimic happiness, fear, or distress. This programming makes them seem more alive than other servitors, which many find disturbing precisely because it crosses the line between obviously mechanical and eerily human. Cherubim are particularly common in ecclesiarchy facilities. The symbolism is obvious. Angelic beings serving the God Emperor's church, representing purity and devotion. They flutter through cathedrals during services, hover near cardinals during important meetings, and accompany sisters of battle into combat. For the faithful, their presence reinforces religious imagery drawn from ancient Terran mythology. For the cynical, they're just another type of servitor, slightly more elaborate but fundamentally the same. The orders militant of the Adepta Sororitas make extensive use of cherubim in battle. These combat cherubs carry ammunition, hold relics that need protection, or even bear small weapons. They follow sisters into combat, bobbing through the air on their anti-grav generators, performing support functions while battle rages around them. The sight of these childlike constructs in the middle of warfare strikes many as particularly grotesque, a juxtaposition of innocence and violence that embodies something deeply wrong about the Imperium. When Robut Guilliman, the resurrected Primarch, returned to active service and saw cherubim for the first time in 10,000 years, he was reportedly disgusted. To him, someone raised in a more rational age before the Emperor's divinity was accepted as fact. The idea of creating artificial children to serve as religious symbols seemed absurd and disturbing. But by the 41st millennium, cherubim are so normalized that most Imperial citizens don't think twice about them. Occasionally, cherubim malfunction in ways that suggest they might possess more awareness than the Mechanicus claims. Reports exist of cherubim showing signs of distress beyond their programming, becoming agitated, or attempting to communicate in ways not consistent with their supposed capabilities. Some psychers report sensing something like consciousness from cherubim, though whether this is genuine awareness or just echoes of the biological programming is debated. Other specialized servitor types exist beyond standard workers and cherubim. Combat servitors are heavily armed and armored, used as guards or auxiliary forces. Praetorian servitors are massive constructs, sometimes created from ogrins or genetically engineered humanoids, serving as bodyguards for tech priests. Medical servitors assist in hospitals, their steady hands and programmed knowledge making them effective surgical assistants, despite their lack of true understanding. Some Space Marine chapters use servitors created from failed aspirants, or, in rare cases, as punishment for Space Marines who commit serious crimes. These Astartes servitors are larger and more capable than standard versions, incorporating some of the genetic enhancements that make Space Marines superhuman. The practice is controversial, even within the Adeptus Astartes, with some chapters refusing to condemn even failed aspirants to such a fate, while others, like the Iron Hands, consider it a practical necessity. The Adeptus Mechanicus itself has countless specialized servitor types for specific industrial and technical purposes. Lex Mechanic servitors assist with data processing. Navigator servitors help with ship operations. Enginarium servitors maintain starship engines in conditions that would kill regular humans within minutes. Each type is optimized for its specific role, the human components selected and modified to provide the ideal biological substrate for the necessary cybernetics. What all these specialized forms share is the same fundamental nature as standard servitors, their human biology repurposed into tools, whether that biology came from vats, from criminals, from failed aspirants, or, in the darkest cases, from sources the Imperium prefers not to acknowledge. The result is the same. Conscious minds are eliminated or severely limited. Free will is destroyed, and what remains is shaped into whatever form serves the Imperium's needs. The existence of these constructs, particularly cherubim with their disturbing innocence, raises questions about imperial values that most citizens prefer not to contemplate. If creating artificial children to serve as flying decorations is acceptable, what does that say about how the Imperium views human dignity? If transforming criminals into servitors is standard practice, where is the line between punishment and dehumanization? These questions don't have comfortable answers, which is why they're rarely asked. The industrial scale of human recycling. To truly understand what the Imperium does to criminals, we need to step back and look at the scale. We're not talking about individual cases or isolated incidents. We're talking about an industrial process that operates across 1 million worlds, processing billions of people every year, transforming human beings into components of the imperial machine with the same efficiency that other civilizations might apply to manufacturing goods. The numbers are staggering, even by the standards of Warhammer 40,000's extreme scale. Consider that the Imperium contains roughly 1 million worlds, with populations ranging from millions to hundreds of billions each, until the total human population might exceed 250,000,000 souls. Of this vast sea of humanity, even a tiny percentage caught in the criminal justice system represents an enormous absolute number. Let's be conservative. Suppose only 1 in 10,000 imperial citizens runs afoul of the law seriously enough to warrant processing into servitors, penal legions, or other punishments beyond local justice. That's still hundreds of billions of people. Of course, the actual rate is probably much higher. On hive worlds with populations numbering in the hundreds of billions, crime is endemic. On forge worlds, worker failure rates might send entire shifts to servitor conversion. On garrison worlds, military justice grinds through thousands of condemned soldiers every year. The logistics of this processing are themselves staggering. Every major imperial world has facilities for creating servitors, usually administered by the local Mechanicus presence. Forge worlds might have dozens or even hundreds of conversion facilities, each capable of processing thousands of people per day. These facilities operate around the clock, feeding the endless demand for biological machinery. Similarly, penal worlds must constantly receive new prisoners to replace those who die from overwork accidents, or hostile environments. Transport ships carry thousands of condemned criminals across the void, depositing them on airless rocks or toxic wastelands where they'll labor until death. These prison transports are themselves a specialized branch of Imperial logistics, moving human cargo with the same efficiency applied to moving ammunition or rations. The Ecclesiarchy maintains its own production facilities for archoflagellants, though these are smaller and more specialized. An archoflagellant requires more extensive modification than a servitor and is intended for a specific purpose, so the volume is lower. But even at lower volumes, the total across the entire Imperium adds up to millions of these tormented cyborgs being created and deployed every year. Penal legions are constantly being raised, deployed, destroyed, and reformed. At any given moment, hundreds of these units might be fighting across the galaxy. Each legion might contain thousands or tens of thousands of troops. They fight with desperate bravery or terrified obedience, die in huge numbers, and are replaced by fresh waves of condemned criminals. The cycle never stops. The economic impact is significant. All these systems require resources: medical facilities for conversion, chemical supplies for archoflagellants, explosive collars for penal legions, transport ships to move prisoners, guards to oversee them, and bureaucrats to manage the paperwork. The Imperium dedicates substantial resources to maintaining its punishment apparatus, resources that could theoretically be used for other purposes. But the systems pay for themselves through the value extracted. Servitors provide labor that would otherwise require paid workers. Archoflagellants are weapons that cost only their initial conversion. Penal legions accomplish military objectives that would otherwise require valuable regular troops. Penal worlds mine resources that fund further Imperial operations. From a purely utilitarian perspective, investing in punishment infrastructure generates positive returns. This creates perverse incentives. Local officials who can convert criminals into servitors gain valuable workers. Military commanders who can form penal legions gain troops for dangerous missions. Mining administrators who can staff operations with penal labor reduce costs dramatically. These officials have economic motivations to ensure steady supplies of criminals, which can lead to expansion of what counts as criminal behavior. The Imperium has developed extensive supply chains to support this system. Manufacturers specialize in producing explosive collars for penal legions. Tech priests develop new servitor patterns optimized for specific tasks. Chemical synthesis facilities produce the drugs needed for archoflagellants. Entire industries exist purely to support the processing and utilization of criminals. The bureaucracy required to manage all this is itself enormous. The Adeptus Arbites maintains records of every sentence passed across the Imperium, though given the scale and the inevitable data loss over interstellar distances, these records are far from complete. The Departamento Munitorum tracks penal legion assignments and deployments. The Adeptus Mechanicus maintains inventories of servitors and their current assignments. Thousands of scribes and data servitors work constantly to keep these systems functioning. Mistakes are inevitable at this scale. People are incorrectly convicted. Paperwork gets lost or confused. Someone sentenced to servitor conversion might end up in a penal legion, or vice versa. Entire transports of prisoners have gone missing in the warp, their fates unknown. Servitors are sometimes created from people who were supposed to be executed instead, or from people who weren't supposed to be processed at all. But the system is too vast for individual cases to matter. A few hundred or even thousand errors are rounding errors in populations measured in billions. The cultural impact is profound. Growing up in the Imperium means growing up surrounded by servitors. You see them everywhere, on streets, in workplaces, in homes of the wealthy. You know what they are, or at least you know enough. You understand that criminals become servitors, that failures become servitors, that sometimes even innocent people become servitors. This knowledge shapes behavior. It makes you more compliant, more careful, more willing to tolerate injustice, rather than risk attracting attention. Children in the Imperium learn from an early age not to acknowledge servitors as people. They're taught to treat them as equipment, to ignore any signs of awareness or distress, to accept their presence without question. This conditioning is necessary because the alternative, recognizing servitors as former humans who might have been anyone including yourself or your loved ones, is psychologically unbearable. The indoctrination extends to all aspects of the criminal justice system. Citizens are taught that the adeptus arbites are infallible, that the lex imperialis is perfect, that anyone sentenced to punishment deserved it regardless of circumstances. Questioning these premises is itself considered suspicious, potentially heretical. This creates a society where the machinery of punishment operates without significant resistance, fed by a population that has accepted its necessity. Religious justification provides another layer of acceptance. The imperial creed teaches that suffering serves the emperor, that punishment purifies the soul, that service to the Imperium is the highest calling. Servitors, in this theology, are blessed because they serve the emperor perfectly, without the weaknesses of ego or desire. Archoflagellants earn redemption through their suffering. Penal legionnaires can die absolved if they fight bravely. This framework makes the horror seem acceptable, even noble. The system is also self-perpetuating. Each generation grows up seeing servitors and penal legions as normal, accepting them as inevitable features of imperial life. When those people become officials, judges, tech priests, they continue the practices they were raised with. Innovation in this context means finding new ways to extract value from criminals, not questioning whether the fundamental approach is right. External threats reinforce the system. The Imperium is genuinely besieged by Xenos horrors, chaos corruption, and countless other dangers. This constant state of emergency is used to justify harsh measures. We can't afford mercy because enemies surround us. We can't waste resources on rehabilitation because survival requires efficiency. Every servitor, every archoflagellant, every penal legionnaire is framed as a necessary sacrifice to keep humanity alive. The human cost, consciousness in chains. Behind all these statistics and systems are individual human experiences. Each servitor was once someone with thoughts, feelings, memories, and hopes. Each archoflagellant is still someone, trapped in a nightmare they can't escape. Each penal legionnaire is a person facing certain death while maintaining the fiction that they might be redeemed. The human cost of imperial justice is measured not just in numbers, but in the sum of individual suffering. Consider the experience of someone sentenced to servitor conversion. You stand in the courtroom as the judge pronounces your fate. You know what's coming because you've seen servitors your entire life. You understand that within days, you won't exist anymore. The person you are, your memories, your personality, everything that makes you who you are, will be destroyed. A shell will remain, wearing your face, moving through your body, but you'll be gone. The terror must be overwhelming. You try to appeal, to beg, to explain, but the sentence has been passed. Guards seize you and drag you away. You're transported to a mechanicus facility, placed in a holding cell with others facing the same fate. Some break down, some rage against their fate, some simply go silent, shutting down mentally before the tech priests can do it physically. Then comes the processing. You're strapped to a table. Tech priests begin their work. You feel the incisions, the injections, the probes entering your skull. You know what's happening to you, and you can't stop it. Your thoughts begin to fragment as portions of your brain are destroyed or damaged. Your sense of self starts dissolving. The last coherent thought you have might be a memory of someone you loved, a place you felt safe, or simply a desperate plea that goes unheard. For archoflagellants, the horror is different because more of them remains. You're still conscious, still aware, but you have no control. When dormant, your mind is filled with religious imagery and hymns, unable to think clearly or form coherent thoughts. When activated for combat, You're flooded with rage and violence, forced to watch yourself commit acts of brutality while powerless to stop. The worst part might be the moments between, when the drugs are wearing off, and you have brief clarity to realize what you've become. Penal legionnaires face a different kind of suffering. You retain your humanity, your consciousness, your free will, but you know you're going to die. The missions you're sent on aren't designed for survival. You watch friends die beside you, knowing you'll follow soon. The explosive collar around your neck is a constant reminder that your life is no longer your own, and the only hope offered is so distant, so unlikely, that holding on to it feels like torture in itself. Some might argue that most of these people deserve punishment. They were criminals after all. They broke laws, committed crimes, harmed others. But even accepting that premise, does anyone deserve to have their consciousness destroyed, their body transformed into a tool, their suffering extended indefinitely? And that's assuming justice was correctly served, which in the Imperium's Byzantine legal system is far from guaranteed. The question of consciousness becomes crucial when considering servitors. If they're truly mindless, lacking any awareness of their existence, then perhaps the horror is less than it appears. Death of the mind might be tragic, but at least there's no ongoing suffering. But the evidence of mindlock episodes, where servitor personalities surface, suggests that something might remain. Some spark of consciousness, trapped in a body it can't control, experiencing existence but unable to communicate or influence anything. Imagine being a servitor. You can't remember who you were, but something like memory remains, fragments of experience that make no sense. You perform tasks automatically, compelled by programming you can't resist. Sometimes you try to speak, but your vocalizations are meaningless sounds. Sometimes you try to move differently, but your body follows its programming instead of your will. You exist in a nightmare of powerlessness, unable to even understand what's happened to you. For some individuals, these fates are worse than death. That's why some condemned criminals, when offered the choice between execution and servitor conversion or penal legion service, choose death. Better to end consciousness cleanly than face existence as something less than human. The Imperium respects these choices because execution is cheaper than conversion anyway. But many don't have the courage to choose death, hoping that somehow they'll survive, be spared, or find redemption. The families of the condemned suffer too. Your loved one disappears into the criminal justice system. Maybe you receive notification of their sentence, maybe you don't. If they become a servitor, you might someday encounter them. They could be working in the same facility where they once worked as a free person, and you'd have to see them, recognize their face, know what they've become, and pretend not to notice, because acknowledging servitors as former people is itself suspicious. If your loved one joins a penal legion, you might receive periodic updates through military channels, assuming anyone bothers to track individual penal legionnaires. More likely, you simply never hear from them again. One day you realize they must be dead, killed in some forgotten battle on some world you've never heard of, buried in an unmarked grave if they were buried at all. The psychological impact on imperial citizens who witness this system is significant. You learn not to question authority because questioning might make you a criminal. You learn to look away when servitors malfunction and show signs of awareness. You accept that the Arbites are infallible because the alternative, that they might make mistakes or be unjust, is too terrible to contemplate. You develop a kind of emotional callousness as self-protection, treating the suffering around you as normal and necessary. Some individuals within the Imperium do recognize the horror of what they're doing. Some tech priests performing servitor conversions might pause occasionally, wondering about the person they're erasing. Some arbitrators might question whether certain sentences were just. Some military commanders might feel guilt about sending penal legions to certain death. But these doubts are rarely expressed and almost never lead to change. The system is too vast, too entrenched, too necessary to the Imperium's function to be seriously challenged. And perhaps that's the ultimate tragedy. The Imperium genuinely needs these systems. Without servitors, it couldn't maintain its industrial capacity. Without penal legions, it couldn't conduct certain military operations. Without penal worlds, it couldn't extract resources from hostile environments. The horror is not gratuitous cruelty, but practical necessity, which in some ways makes it worse. These people are suffering because their suffering serves a purpose, and that purpose might be the survival of the human species. Conclusion. The price of survival. We've taken a long, dark journey through the machinery of imperial justice. We've seen how criminals are identified, arrested, judged, and sentenced by the Adeptus Arbites. We've examined the various fates that await the condemned: transformation into servitors, conversion into archiflagellants, assignment to penal legions, exile to penal worlds, or creation into specialized constructs like cherubim. We've looked at the industrial scale of these systems and the human cost they exact. What does it all mean? The Imperium's treatment of criminals reveals fundamental truths about its nature. This is not a civilization that values individual human rights, dignity, or redemption in any conventional sense. It's a civilization that has reduced humans to resources, evaluating each person's worth in purely utilitarian terms. You are valuable if you serve the Imperium's needs. If you fail or transgress, you become raw material to be processed into something more useful. The horrifying efficiency of these systems reflects the Imperium's pragmatic approach to survival. In a galaxy where humanity is genuinely threatened with extinction, where resources are stretched to their limits and enemies press from all sides, harsh measures seem justified. The Imperium cannot afford the luxury of mercy or rehabilitation. It needs every resource it can get, including the biological resources represented by criminals and failures. But there's a deeper question lurking beneath all this horror. Is this survival worth the cost? If maintaining human civilization requires grinding millions of people into servitors, forcing others to fight as expendable troops, and creating systems of oppression that span 1,000,000 worlds, are we actually preserving humanity or just extending its suffering? The Imperium would answer that any survival is better than extinction, that maintaining human life in any form justifies any sacrifice. But that answer requires accepting that the means justify the ends, no matter how horrible the means become. The transformation of criminals into ammunition is not just about punishment or resource extraction, it's about control. By creating a system where any failure, any transgression, any suspicion can result in losing your humanity, the Imperium keeps its population compliant. Fear of servitor conversion, of archoflagellation, of penal legion service keeps citizens in line more effectively than any number of enforcers could. The system perpetuates itself through terror, and that terror is built into every servitor you pass on the street. For us, looking at this fictional universe from outside, the horror serves as a warning. The Imperium represents an extrapolation of certain tendencies, the devaluation of individual rights in favor of collective survival, the industrialization of punishment, the reduction of humans to mere utility. It shows us what happens when efficiency and necessity become the only values that matter, when the means of survival become so extreme that they compromise the worth of what's being saved. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is no waste, because everything, including human beings, has been commodified. Criminals don't just lose their freedom, they lose their very selves, transformed into tools and weapons and expendable soldiers. This is the ultimate expression of a totalitarian society, one that has optimized its systems to such a degree that humanity itself becomes negotiable. The Imperium turns criminals into ammunition because it must, because survival requires it, because the alternative might be extinction. But in doing so, it has created a civilization where the line between person and property has been erased, where consciousness can be destroyed or imprisoned at will, where human dignity has no meaning beyond utility. This is the price of survival in the 41st millennium. Whether it's a price worth paying is a question the Imperium stopped asking 10,000 years ago. We can only hope that such questions remain open in our own future. If you found this deep dive into the dark machinery of Imperial justice informative, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on the Imperium's treatment of criminals. Or share your own favorite dark lore from Warhammer 40,000. There's always more darkness to explore in the grim dark future, and I'll be here to shine a light on it. Until next time, remember, in the Imperium, even in death, you may still serve.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.